Hello and welcome to Virtual Investor Conferences. On behalf of OTC Markets and our co-host Zach Small Cap Research, we are very pleased you have joined us for our quarterly life science investor forum. Our next live presentation is from Hemostemix. Hemostemix is a clinical stage biotechnology company specializing in stem cell therapies. Please note, you may submit questions for the presenter in the box to the left of the slides. You can also view a company's availability for a one-on-one meeting by clicking book a meeting in the top toolbar. At this point, I'm very pleased to welcome Thomas Smink, President, Chief Executive Officer, and co-founder of Hemostemix, which trades on the OTCQB venture market under the symbol HMTXF and on the TSXV under the symbol HEM. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure to be with you. Again, Hemostemix is a stem cell therapy company. And I want to start there because there is some confusion as to where stem cells come from. There's essentially two types of stem cells. There's stem cells that come from your own body. Those are what is known as autologous. And there's stem cells that come from a donor's body. Those are known as allogeneic. And if you think about it, stem cells that come from your own body are safer. You cannot get a cancer, for example, from your own stem cells, which you can get from a donor stem cell. You cannot get the human form of mad cow disease from your own stem cells. You can get that from a donor stem cell. And so we are your fountain of youth company. We use stem cells that are generated from your blood. And I will talk about that in more detail to give you an idea of how they work and why they work better than a stem cell that comes from a donor's body. I am going to make a number of forward-looking statements to give you an appreciation for the answers to three questions that I think any biotech investor would ask a CEO. The first question is, what is the proof that this technology works? The second question is, what is your path and timeline to revenue? And the third question is, what is the blue sky valuation opportunity on this investment? And so I'm going to thread my answers to those questions in this presentation. To give you a little bit of background about myself, married 33 years, have 3 children, one who is actually the fastest man to cover 800 meters on planet Earth, Austin Smink. Austin set a new world record of 1:35.59 seconds in May of last year. He won a gold medal in the 800 and a bronze medal in the 100. He also holds a world record in the 400 at 48.06. But that's a little bit about me, a family man, an entrepreneur, a co-founder of this company, somebody who is, along with the rest of the management team, has invested, and our directors, has invested $9,100,000 in this company, in your fountain of youth, since March of 2020. And so I trademarked your fountain of youth because at the end of the day, that's exactly what this stem cell does. It generates new circulation where the body signals it needs new circulation. And if you know anybody who's had a stroke, a heart attack, suffers from diabetic foot ulcer, is suffering from vascular dementia, or congestive heart failure, this is a therapy that you want to bring to their attention. Now, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and I don't think this picture could be in. This picture probably says more than 10,000 words. But look at on the picture on the frame in the top left in frame A. That is a limb that is about to be amputated because the individual has what's called critical limb ischemia. They've lost circulation to the toes, feet, and leg as a consequence of the buildup of plaque and the deterioration of circulation in the small vessels, in the small arteries, as well as the large vessels. Now, this is to the right is the same foot 4 weeks later after treatment with ACP, our therapeutic. And this isn't the company's photo. This is actually our phase 2 clinical trial data, which was posted by the University of Toronto, the top 3 of the top 250 institutions worldwide for healthcare. U of T is number 3. U of T and UBC reported to the 41st meeting of vascular surgeons our phase 2 clinical data at its midpoint. And they reported this, they showed this picture, and they said that 83% of the patients they had followed for 4.5 years had healing of ulcers, like this foot, cessation of pain. You can see that the foot on the left is in a pain scale of 10, is at an 11 out of 10, 24/7, 365 days a year. 4 weeks later, it's healed, and the pain has gone down to a level 2 or a level 3 out of 10. And again, the U of T reported 83% of the patients they followed for 4.5 years had experienced these results, and it saved their limb from amputation. Now, that's as compared to a 60% mortality rate in this patient population in 5 years. So that's obviously a world-class result. But I wanted to, again, I'm going to answer 3 questions. What is the proof that it works? What's the path to revenue and timeline? And what's the blue sky? So I'm going to take you through the data of our 7 clinical studies to understand and appreciate the answer to the first question on a scientific basis. So in the first study, going from left to right, the first study was of that disease, critical limb ischemia, and 83%, 5 of 6 patients saved their limb from amputation. The second study, same disease, was a randomized phase 1. 20 patients were randomized, 10 to receive ACP, 10 to receive normal care, all followed for 2 years. In the normal care group, consistent with this disease, there was 20% mortality, 2 deaths, and 75% of remaining limbs were amputated. That was 6 out of 8 limbs. In the treatment group, there was 0% mortality, and 7 of 10 limbs, 70%, were saved from amputation. And that was followed by our phase 2 double-blind randomized clinical trial done in 13 centers across North America, 11 in the US, 2 in Canada. And we demonstrated and published statistically significant wound healing at 4 months, cessation of pain, and fully 93.5% of limbs that were treated were saved from amputation, as compared to 90% of limbs not treated in the placebo arm. And then there are 4 heart studies here. The first one is of severe angina. This is the chest pain at rest. These patients, we published a statistically significant decrease in the symptoms, such that these patients went from chest pain at rest to no chest pain at rest, and only having chest pain during exercise. And we published a 24% increase in exercise capacity as measured by the 6-minute walk test. And then the next 3 studies are of what you and I normally refer to as hardening of the arteries, or dilated cardiomyopathy, which is thickening of the heart wall. And as the heart wall expands, it loses its ability to pump a volume of blood, which is measured as the left ventricle ejection fraction. What's interesting about these 3 studies is it's 3 phase 1s done by 3 independent teams that all generated the same statistically significant results. The first study, 106 patients, done by the cardiologist to the late King of Thailand. The second study of 41 patients, done by the co-founder of the Minnesota Heart Institute. And the third study of 54 patients, done by a cardiologist in Florida and 2 cardiologists in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. And again, what's interesting and what we published in Stem Cell Research and Therapy is up to a 47% increase in the volume of blood ejected with each heartbeat in those patients who had a left ventricular ejection fraction of 20% or less, who had dilated cardiomyopathy, thickening of the heart wall. and up to a 27% increase in those in the left ventricular ejection fraction percent in those patients who were suffering from hardening of the arteries. So I hope you agree with me, based on the science and the scientific evidence, that this works and therefore is worthy of your risk dollars. Now, the second question I want to answer for you is, what is the path to revenue and what is the timeline to revenue? We have a fully funded production agreement with Cytoimmune, our partner. And the way it works is, imagine I raised money in the public markets. I'm lending that money from Hemostemix Canada to Hemostemix Puerto Rico. I pay our contract manufacturer, Cytoimmune, cash, and I announced a $350,000 cash settlement of our first invoice. And then Cytoimmune invests that $350,000 into Hemostemix's equity. Cytoimmune's committed to produce for us 20 patients a month, and that generates $12 million a year in revenue. And by cycling the money back, you can obviously understand Cytoimmune thinks very highly of our equity, and as to why you should too. But more importantly, it gives us a fully funded production agreement, and it satisfies that question in terms of timeline to revenue as to, can you produce and when will you produce? In this case, Cytoimmune, we're doing a transfer of technology, will be in revenue in Q4. Now, the other side of the equation is quite frankly, it's the physician side. What's the evidence that you have patients who can be treated by physicians? How do you get how do they fulfill? Now, what I did was I went to the 13 physicians who were treating the phase 2 patients and the cardiologists that were treating the heart patients, and I asked them 2 questions. Question 1, what's the number of patients you can refer to me on a monthly basis? And question 2, what's the number of patients I can refer to you? What's your treatment capacity? And they told me I can expect 6 to 16 patients a month to be referred from them, and that if I refer them 336 patients a month, they can treat 336 patients a month. So again, at 20 a month, I'm doing 12 million a year. I have 16 times that in terms of physician capacity to treat these patients. And now the last part of that equation, quite frankly, is the clinics. You know, there's some 5,000 stem cell clinics around the world that are offering donor-based stem cell treatments, and who have really no scientific evidence to support their use. But nonetheless, they have a very good business offering a donor-based stem cell for whatever ails the individual. And and many of these clinics are on platforms like an Amazon platform. And our pitch to them is, you can add Hemostemix to your shelf. You can add a scientifically validated treatment for cardiovascular disease to your shelf, and thereby offer something to patients who are in dire need. But on the other hand, help yourself in terms of getting on side of the regulatory environment. And so that's our path to revenue and timeline in terms of being in revenue. I want to describe for you what ACP is and what the patient goes through, so you understand how scalable this is. And essentially, if you've ever donated blood, that is step 1 of our process. The patient goes into any doctor's office anywhere in the world and donates 250 cc's of blood to themselves. That is shipped to us on day 1, and it's processed into ACP from day 2 through 5. It goes through a quality assurance, quality control check, and is shipped back to the treating physician on day 6. so that the patient and that physician are in an appointment that's preset for day 7. And that is, very scalable. And if you want to compare that to a bone marrow extraction, for example, a patient that requires stem cells from a bone marrow extraction has to go into a hospital, has to be in an operating theater, has to have a large needle jammed into their thigh and into their iliac crest, and they then suck out a big volume of bone marrow and process that bone marrow in the hospital. And that is not a scalable business model. This, using blood draw in any doctor's office, centralized process, is very scalable. And so why physicians and patients like it is because it's safe. It's ethical. There's no concern about where the stem cells are coming from. It's got, it meets the physician's first duty, do no harm. This is a very safe product. It's an easy protocol to do a blood draw, and a week later, if you're suffering from critical limb ischemia like this individual picture on the bottom left, the physician can do an outpatient procedure in his office and save limbs from amputation. And again, saving a limb is saving a life. But think about it this way. I can say to the doctor, if you add 4 blood draws a day to your practice, you have a nurse do 4 blood draws a day on these patients, and a week later, you're in a procedure with these patients and you're doing a half-hour procedure of injecting the patient's stem cells into their leg to save their limb from amputation. If you charge $1,000 a patient, you will make $1 million a year extra income. If you charge $2,000 a patient, you'll double that. For Hemostemix, one doctor making 4 blood draws a day generates 80 patients a month, which is $48 million a year in revenue. And that's only one doctor. So you can see how this becomes very scalable. And for the physician, it meets their do no harm criteria. Here's a timeline of Hemostemix in terms of when the company was started, when we won the World Economic Forum Technology Pioneer Award for proving scientifically that there is sufficient stem cells in 250 cc's of blood from which a therapy can be made. And when we completed each of the 7 clinical trials and published those clinical trials in peer-reviewed journals. From a competition point of view, we compared to BioCardia, that's in a phase 2 study of heart disease. They use a bone marrow-based stem cell for that. We compared to BioGencell, which is a peripheral blood-based competitor. They're just recruiting for their first phase 2 trial. We've completed 7 clinical trials, including a phase 2 trial. And whereas BioGencell is just focused on heart disease and BioGencell is just focused on peripheral arterial disease, we've demonstrated safety and efficacy in both the treatment of peripheral arterial disease and cardiovascular disease in the heart. Now, the company is essentially facing a phase 3 clinical trial, and we can do that in the area of critical limb ischemia. Most biotech companies that you've come across as an investment put all their eggs in one basket, go to the equity market, raise equity, and complete the phase 3 trial. But here I am with a company that has demonstrated complete safety in 498 patients, significant efficacy in the treatment of 7 different types of cardiovascular disease. So I said, look, let's treat for revenue and use that revenue to fund the phase 3 clinical trial. That way we become stabilized in revenue and profitable from the generation of treatments of no option patients and those patients who can be treated in a phase 1 clinical trial. So whereas we as Hemostemix have demonstrated safety and efficacy at the end stage of the disease processes of angina, critical limb ischemia, dilated cardiomyopathy, ischemic cardiomyopathy, including congestive heart failure, I said, let's start a clinical trial, a phase 1 clinical trial in each of these indications, but do it earlier in the disease process so that we can prove to the world that just like it works at the end of the disease process, it works at the earlier stage of the disease process. And we can save the healthcare system and insurance companies, 4 or 5 years of expenses for the treatment of these diseases. And so that's what we're doing. You'll see us announce a basket protocol for the treatment of each of these indications. We already announced the phase 1 clinical trial of vascular dementia, because just like plaque builds up in the heart or builds up in the limb and you lose circulation to the heart and get a heart attack, or you lose circulation to the limb and get critical limb ischemia, one of the 4 forms of dementia is a buildup of plaque in the brain, which leads to dementia, vascular dementia. And we announced this week the phase 1 trial of vascular dementia. And we did that because we have ample anecdotal evidence that it works. Mrs. Lamb was a patient who was treated for vascular dementia some 10 years ago. And I was on a phone call, had the distinct pleasure of talking to her 10 years post-treatment. And in 12 minutes, she described her work career, the time she had raising her family, the lovely second marriage that she has, and had enough time to make a lunch appointment with the physician that treated her to take him out to lunch to thank him again for getting her a treatment of ACP for vascular dementia. So that's, I hope, answers question number 2 with respect to our path to revenue and our timeline. Now, there's one other piece here, which is the forward sale, the use of a forward sale. In the gold business, what we would do is we would forward sell the gold, take the cash, produce the gold, deliver the gold, and borrow and do it and repeat it. Well, I said, let's apply that to this business. I'm going to sell forward the treatment so that patients will understand if they're patient number 1, number 20, number 50, or 100. It will enable me to grow the revenue of the company on a pre-sold treatment basis. And I'll be able to use that revenue to ramp up from 20 to 40 a month, and from 40 to 80 a month, and from 80 to 160 treatments a month. And so what I've done is I've, to date, in 2 months, sold 23. These are all inbound sales. And what my plan to do is sell 200 of these treatments in the next 10 months, and thereby have the ability to schedule physician time for these patients to get treated in a very rational way, schedule production time so that we know if we're producing 20 a month or 40 a month, and thereby grow revenue and fund the phase 3 clinical trial. So I hope that answers the path to revenue question. Now, I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to jump to the last question that I want to answer for you, which is, what's the blue sky opportunity on Hemostemix? And I answer this question by comparing Hemostemix to what Bristol Myers Squibb paid $13.8 billion cash for, and that was myocardia, for a pill form of treatment of dilated cardiomyopathy called mavacamten. What's interesting is when you compare the 3 heart studies that Hemostemix has done on the treatment of dilated cardiomyopathy to the results of mavacamten, you will notice that whereas mavacamten has a label restriction, it can only be used for people who have dilated cardiomyopathy and a left ventricle ejection fraction of between 65% and 55%. Hemostemix can treat dilated cardiomyopathy from 65% down to 18%. And so I would argue with you all day that whereas Bristol Myers Squibb paid $13.8 billion for those patients who have dilated cardiomyopathy that have an ejection fraction range of 10%, Hemostemix can treat that same patient with an ejection fraction range of 47%. And you have a choice. You can either be on mavacamten for the rest of your life, or you can have one stem cell treatment using your own stem cells to regenerate your heart and thereby not be on a medication. So with that, Greg, I think I should turn it over for questions to give some time for questions. Are there any questions on the material? Well, I hope you'll join me as a shareholder. Again, management and the board have $9,100,000 invested in your Fountain of Youth. I would strongly suggest that this is a very good investment and would welcome you as a shareholder. Thank you very much, and I wish you a great day.